Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Natalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. So welcome to today's episode of How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. Today I've got a really special guest and I'm excited to have this time with her. First of all, I'll give you a biography and then we'll start to talk, but there is so many interesting things that are coming up. Stay tuned. So, first of all, Lizzie Pickering is a grief guide, speaker and filmmaker who supports individuals and organizations to understand the impact of grief, shock and trauma in everyday life and at work. Drawing on 25 years of experience, including caring for her eldest son, Harry, and 12 years at children's hospice Helen Douglas House, she brings deep, lived insight to her work with bereaved parents, siblings and families. Through talks, workshops and one-on-one grief guidance, she helps people translate the confusion of loss, develop practical tools and self-care practices, and find healthy ways to live alongside their grief. She also collaborates with corporate clients worldwide, opening compassion conversations about bereavement, change, and mental health in the workplace. As the author of When Grief Equals Love and producer of films and podcasts on loss and generational trauma, her main intention is to reduce the stigma of seeking support to help people find meaning, connection, and renewed life in the aftermath of loss. So, welcome, Lizzie, to our podcast. How are you today?
Oh, thank you so much, Natalie. I'm so grateful for that introduction. I'm very well, very, very well, thank you, and so pleased to be here with you.
So for me, as I said before we started recording, for me, this is a gift for me that I can spend time with you because we have a joint passion and we also have some part of a joint history in terms of what we've experienced. However, I shy away from comparing grief because it's not helpful in the sense of which one is how it is. It's individual. But for those listeners who don't know you yet, why don't we start with you giving a little bit of an introduction of who you are, how your connection is with grief, loss and trauma, and just share for those who haven't met Lizzie yet.
Oh, thank you, Natalie. It's interesting when you're asking me that question. I guess my obvious response would be that my introduction to grief was through my son Harry, who died 25 years ago, my eldest son. But actually, I don't think it's the truth. And I think that might put too much pressure on him and his story. I think the truth is I was born into grief. My mother had many miscarriages and 2 stillbirths before I was born, and I'm an only child as a result. And I was 10 when I found out about my siblings who'd died or hadn't made it. And I had a fascination with grief and how people survive grief throughout my teenage years. And maybe that's what prepared me to go through the loss of my son, Harry. But I think my interest in grief stemmed from, my own birthright, really. And I was fascinated by the work of Primo Levi and Holocaust survival. I read First World War prose and poetry as a teenager, and I was always drawn to real life stories and stories of how strong we are as humans and how we can survive great grief and loss and trauma. But I got a sense from all that reading that it didn't just happen it wasn't something that, you just did. It was something that took work to process grief and trauma. And I think, so I already had a little of that knowledge inbuilt when I did go through my own grief over my son.
Mm-hmm.
And reading has always been so helpful to me. Harry was diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy when he was 17 months old.
Mm-hmm.
And all our children had a 1 in 4 chance of having the condition. And my second son, Cam, was already born. He was 6 weeks old on that diagnosis. So we had to have him tested as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then my daughter, Emily, was born subsequently, and we had her tested in vitro. So we went through a lot of processing in all of those situations. And I realized early on that that living grief and anticipatory grief are such a big deal. Those were my first points of trauma.
Yeah.
So I guess, it's a mix of all those events in my life that gave me this interest in grief and then subsequently wanting to support others.
Mm-hmm. So after the loss of Harry, this is 25 years, and it's amazing for me to speak with you with such a time difference in terms of to look back and see the long-term effect, as we spoke as well. And as you know, or you might know, and the listeners definitely do, my daughter's death is 14 and a half years ago, and my mother's also 14. So we have this time span that we can look back, and I think it's a beautiful resource for people to listen to as they are probably in the midst of it. And so, but let's track back to this time, this challenging time, and then what propelled you into going into the place where you support others in that, because that's a process in itself. In my case, I was as a therapist before, and it's interesting that you share your interest in loss and grief and death, because I realized when you were speaking, I had that too. And something in my life also prepared me where I did a Buddhist practice called 1 year to live before I even had children or even thought about having children. So I track back. Okay, that was interesting. Or one of my studies in my counseling study was grief and loss specifically, and I found that fascinating. But take us to that time when this desire came to support others.
Yes, I think it partly came from my parents. My parents were very unmaterialistic people. And everything in the way they lived was about being family, being good friends to people. My dad was in the army. My mum did a lot of voluntary work for pastoral care, helping excluded children from school. When in the army, they were in Germany in the 50s. She helped with misplaced and displaced children, helping to find homes for children in orphanages after the war. And so my parents were all about service to others, and they were very, very happy people. They'd been through so much themselves, but they lived a very strong and deep and good life. And they prioritized health and friendship and family over anything else, absolutely anything else. And they lived quite frugally. And so that's the household I grew up in. It was a house full of music and laughter and friends and cooking food. And so I think that is where my notion that sharing grief was a very useful thing. Sharing in the grief of others and chipping away at my own grief by the support I was given from Helen Douglas House, the children's hospice you mentioned. I was a bereaved mum there. My son died there before I worked there. And I benefited from 2 years of grief support and joining a course. So I'd benefited from the care they gave before and after my son's death. And so again, it was sort of sharing and having the support demonstrated to me that it made all the difference in the world. I still think to this day, without the support of Mari and Erica, who were my bereavement team at Helen and Douglas House, for me personally as a bereaved mum, I I just don't think I'd be doing this work today, because they supported me so strongly from the beginning, from even before Harry died, preparing everything, helping me, asking me what did I want? How did we as a family want to go through this? What were the choices we did have? Because as you know so well, so much choice is taken away from us when we go through this trauma of our children dying. And actually tiny amounts of choice and agency being given back to you through good support. I mean, there's just nothing like it, is there? And I just don't think we'd be here today having this conversation if I hadn't had that support.
Yeah.
So then when I was feeling stronger, I wanted to be able to replicate that in my work in some way. But at the beginning, I didn't really know what that would look like. And it started with going to work at the Children's Hospice. First of all, on the fundraising team, essentially, I co-founded the fundraising team there. But I worked very closely with the bereavement team, eventually helping to set up peer-to-peer support for parents and bereaved siblings. And that was the sort of key to this love of being able to, we have to remain curious, don't we? And I think part of support work is also being curious and
Absolutely
investigating. And, I often call myself a grief investigator, because with every client, we are investigating together. It's not us particularly leading the way, is it? We're in a support role and we're helping them to investigate their own grief. But in doing so, we always learn.
Exactly. It's not telling them what to do, although we have a wealth of experience and knowledge, but asking them or making them some suggestions and then seeing for them making this decision. Yeah. I reflected back on how it was for me when my daughter died. And even though I had studied grief and loss, I can see the specific people that were there alongside me that made such a difference, just like you described. And that as well for me, I can see made a difference of me going forward with it, to have this initial setup of people who were just walking alongside me. Either, for example, the social worker I can remember, or the nurse in the NICU who was there with us when we withdrew care or we stopped the machines. So that were just symbolic people that were so important for me, how to carry that. And as you were saying, making choices, but also having time, not being rushed into something, depending on the situation, of course, if it's needing.
Absolutely. And Natalie, those first moments for you after that support was withdrawn and helping you through that time, and one nurse with a small act of kindness, or one word at the right time, or one question at the right time, it's like putting puzzle pieces together, isn't it? And those are the first pieces of the puzzle in helping us to find a way forward with our grief. And it's so important. Everybody alongside you has a role to play, even if it's just for a few minutes. It's so vital that those minutes are the right minutes spent together with the right words.
And so we were talking just before recording about the amount of grief books that are being released. And I can see every person that comes to me, or the people that I hear from other podcasts, they say, there was nothing out there that would support me. So I started something, or I wanted to talk about it. And I'm surprised every moment. It feels like for these people coming into that space, they don't yet have enough resources, or they don't find enough resources yet. And so tell us a little bit about your book, because as you know, it's interesting, we spoke about that. So my book, Grieving Parents Surviving Loss, as a couple, I've written in the first year, and it came out of a conversation where someone made a comment on the notes at that time that I put on Facebook. And she said, you should write a book. And I thought, about what? But something stirred in me, and I could feel that it was meaningful, and there was this choiceless choice. So it was in the first year. But then when I translated it into German in the third year, and it was just a literal translation, I thought, I wouldn't say it like that now. So the perspective of time made a difference. But tell us the subtitle of your book, When Grief Equals Love, because that's sort of an interesting part and the bridge to that.
Yes. So the subtitle is Long-Term Perspectives on Living with Loss. And it came from a rejection letter from a publisher, one of the big publishers, who they wrote such a generous letter, for which I was very grateful, with their rejection. And they'd taken on too many grief authors and, couldn't take on another. But they were very complimentary, thankfully. And they said that my unique selling point for the book, compared to other books they'd received, was that it was the long-term perspective. And I mean, Natalie, can I just say thank heaven for your book, because you, as a therapist writing in the first year, yes, maybe 3 years on, the perspectives had changed, of course, but I'm sure, both versions are so valid because it demonstrates how we change, doesn't it? And actually, the first part of my book is memoir, and it's the first 7 years of grief after Harry died. So it starts a month before he died, and I started writing just freehand with a pen on paper. Writing freely in that month before he died, because I had a strong sense I wanted to record my thoughts down for my surviving children, because they were 2 and 5 at the time. And I wanted them, I just thought, one day, if they ask me much about that period, I want to be able to give it accurately, not just from what I remember. And so I started writing down in earnest. And I carried on for 7 years. And sometimes over that 7 years, there's a gap of 6 months. So I wasn't writing every day for 7 years. And but I just wrote only what I felt was valuable to them, really, in terms of what was happening and in terms of their own grief, because I was witnessing my children's grief.
Absolutely.
And that felt so important. In a way, I was witnessing them for when they were older. And so that there was that part. And in 2015, so Harry died in 2000. And then in 2015, I thought, well, I'll revisit it, because I was doing a lot of public speaking for the children's hospice world then. And I was being asked if I'd written much of what I was saying down, and I didn't ever quite answer accurately. But Sister Frances, who's the founder of the children's hospice movement worldwide, she was encouraging me to publish my diaries. She was the only person that had read them, and she was using some of it for talks on sibling loss. And so for that reason, it encouraged me to think, well, maybe if it can help other people bringing up bereaved siblings, that would be worthwhile. And then I read it again, and I edited it right down. I didn't change any words ever, but I just, condensed it to the useful stuff. It just didn't feel right. And it wasn't till 2021 and 22, when we were in lockdown and I had time, that I revisited it. And I thought, no, I want this to be the long-term perspectives. I really would like to interview other people about their survival of grief, and with many different types of loss. So it includes bereaved siblings, parents, partners, all sorts of types, racial grief, grief of a refugee friend for his country. I've included all those things in the chapters. And then suddenly it felt whole and
Hmm.
not just my story. So the first part does draw on my own story, but the second part is called Community.
Yeah, beautiful. So, what interests me there is, given your children are adults or young adults now, what did they get out of their experience reflected by you? Because that is really interesting for siblings, right?
Yeah.
So, tell us a little bit, whatever you'd like to share.
Yeah, I mean they were the first two adults that I interviewed. So
Hmm.
I thought, well, I need to start with them as adults being interviewed. And all I can say is I think what they've got out of it is that they've passed it on. They I mean, very little time ever goes by, and it's it's now nearly 3 years on since it was published. It was May
Hmm.
23. Um, they they are constantly, my son works as a music producer, my daughter works in film, and they constantly find other bereaved siblings or people who've been through any form of grief on set or out in
Hmm.
the music world. And they're always messaging me to say, can you send a copy of the book too? Or so and so, or I've just passed the book on, or they're going to listen to it on Audible. And so they're the greatest sort of advocates, really, of the story, of their brother's
Hmm.
story and their own story, and they have very strong memories of their own of that time of grief. I mean, my daughter finds it hard that she doesn't have strong memories of her brother other than from photos,
Hmm.
but she's built a picture of him, and I think maybe the book has helped with that picture for her. And her picture is also gained very strongly from the stories of friends. And I know we both are strong believers in continuing bonds and continuing these
Absolutely.
relationships, aren't we, Natalie? And for me, continuing bonds is one of the most important aspects of my work, but also for my family, because I live and breathe continuing bonds.
Yeah.
The notion that we have continued our relationship with Harry, with Cam and Emily's brother. He is so much a part of our family. Um, and I had the most beautiful letter from a friend who has become a friend later in life, but didn't know Harry. She wasn't around in those years. And she came to house sit to look after my cat when we all went away on holiday. And she left this beautiful handwritten letter on the kitchen table when we came home. And it meant so much to me because she said, Lizzie, this house is so full of love, and I can feel Harry here everywhere. And she said,
Oh,
I feel I've got to know him by staying here the week and just being surrounded by the photos and, collages of photos of them all together. And, there are bits of his writing around. There's a memory book on the dresser in the kitchen with really funny stories of what the children said when they were young,
yeah.
including Harry and all the way through. And so she'd built up her own picture without us even there.
Hmm.
And we all have very strong relationships. Cam is still the middle child, Emily's still the youngest child, Harry's the big brother. And it's this telling of stories and keeping them alive in our hearts and memories and in the memories of others
Hmm.
that is so important, isn't it? And I think, I find with clients, the beginning of that journey with continuing bonds is really tough, isn't
Hmm.
it? And I remember at the hospice when Harry's body was still in the little room at the hospice, which was the chilled bedroom where he was laid out just in a bed, not in a coffin, but until the funeral, where we could visit him. And Cam and Emily were going in there every day, very naturally making drawings for him. And it was all very, very natural. So beginning that relationship with death, I suppose, but also carrying on giving things to him, even though he'd just died. It was beautiful. That was the beginning of their journey with continuing that bond. But I remember a member of staff at the hospice said to me as I was walking out of the room, and at the time I was finding being in the room very traumatic, whereas the rest of the family actually took some solace from being there with his body. And I found it too much. And I went in, but I was really hysterical each time. And this member of staff said, Lizzie, he will always be a part of your family. And you'll find that out more and more. And I wanted to punch him at the time.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't see it. I could not see how those words were true. And I remember that with my clients. I handle it very carefully in the early days when you can't feel their presence at all and they seem so far away. But I wrote to him probably 6 months later and said I was beginning to understand what he had meant, and those words had stayed with me. And now I know it to be so true, that he is always a part of this family in a very visceral way. And anyone coming to visit and sharing stories of Harry and how naughty he was and how cheeky and funny, it just brings him right into the room somehow.
Yeah. So that's interesting. How or what do you perceive in working with people? Why is it difficult at the beginning? Or I have an idea, but I'd love to hear it from you. Why do you think it's difficult at the beginning?
If I share mine, will you share yours afterwards?
Sure.
Thank you. I'd love to hear yours. What I see and feel with my clients, and drawing on my own experience, I guess, but mainly what I see with them, is that at the beginning, there's so much pain and so much anguish. Their body is filled with that trauma of the death, however it happened, even if it was expected. It's nothing can really prepare us for this. And the pain is all consuming in every bit, every cell of their body and their mind and their heart and their gut and their throat and their lungs. It's everywhere. But as time passes and they adapt to living with the grief and finding a more comfortable place for it to be within their system, chipping away at it, processing it slowly and gradually, and finding some acceptance of the existence of the grief within them, then gradually I think love can take the place of pain. And we can fill our lives around the grief, and the grief softens. And that's my feeling of what I see and hear and what I witness over days, weeks, months, and years with my clients.
It's so interesting, because I said before, I listen to your conversations that you share on Instagram when you go for a walk, and this is the kind of way that we can do this. So this kind of conversation, to hear what you think, and then to see what happens from my picture, because obviously I have my picture, but then you share, and then it sort of evolves. That is, it's such a gift to me, and I know for the listeners as well. So I think it is, when I look at my clients or myself, it is similar to what you said. At the beginning, there is this pain of grief and the shock and the trauma around the fact that the physicality stops. And I think it's the process, and it's not two-dimensional, it's three-dimensional, in the sense of, from that point of the physicality non-existing, how does this translate in terms of a relationship that is not physical? And I think that is something that the mind cannot conceive. That's not a do this first and then this. It's not a checkbox 1, 2, 3. It's something that shapes, and that process of shaping from the reality, the acceptance of the reality of the non-physicality, and then, well, what can that look like if this person isn't physical, but I have a connection with them? I think that taking that place And also the confusion around words, like acceptance or moving on, or, just like, especially you mentioned acceptance. I mean, the loss itself, I always see it as a fact. The non-physicality, that is, at this moment, the way life happens and death happens, that's just the fact. How it's going to be in 10 years, I don't know. And so from that point of view, then, to say, I have to accept that. But when I accept the non-physicality, there's often attached to it a betrayal, or an idea of, I'm going to betray that person if I fully accept that. So there's this whole concept around moving from the physical non-existence to what connection looks like, but then also accepting and what that means with the sense of guilt and betrayal.
Yeah.
Work
Absolutely.
onwards from that.
Oh no, you're so right. And I feel sad, but I support them, and I've been there myself when I see clients experiencing guilt, often over laughing. I had a client recently who, it was probably 10 months on, and she went out for dinner. And in this case, it was her husband who died young. And she went out for dinner with some female friends and found herself laughing, properly laughing for the first time, and actually in the moment enjoying herself with the solace of these friends and the support and talking about normal things. And she felt so much guilt about it once she caught herself off guard laughing, and we talked a lot about that, obviously, and how important it is to live with sorrow and joy. And that's how we start to balance our system again, isn't it? We live with them side by side. And I mean, to put the long-term loss in the context of what we're talking about into perspective, I went to Mexico last May for the first time, and I loved it there. And I loved it because death was so present and so beautifully present, especially in Oaxaca and the Mexican Day of the Dead. And I wasn't there for that month, but it's everywhere in the markets, in the multi-generational living. Very elderly people are so evident. They're not sitting in nursing homes. They're there working in the markets with their young relatives, with their grandchildren, sometimes even great grandchildren. And the stories are passed on every day in that way. And there are photos of their dead relatives on the market stands. And I would go and ask them. I asked each and every one, who is this person? And they tell me, oh, it's my grandmother. We cook her recipes with this produce, and it was so beautiful. It really was. And while I was in Mexico, I took part in a temazcal ceremony, which is a heat ceremony. It's not a drug related thing. It's just heat, heat and sage and rosemary on a fire. You're in a little hut. And it's another ceremony that's passed on through the eldest for generations and generations of women, usually. And we were in very safe hands, and we were in this little room for an hour in the heat. And it's much hotter than a sauna, but it's a different heat. And I experienced a peace in there over Harry and over the deaths of both my parents that I have never, ever experienced before. Just a sense of their being okay and me being okay, and Harry sort of being within me, but also around us all, and gratitude to my parents for everything they gave me, and gratitude for my healthy children who live today and the lives they have, and just a sense of deep love and gratitude for them. And that's what came out of it for me. And I went with no expectations at all. I didn't know what would happen. It could have just been a lovely heat experience, but it was so much more than that. And quite extraordinary. But the point of saying this is that 25 years on from my son's death, I am still processing. And that took me to another stage of processing.
Mm-hmm.
And we never stop. It's a lifetime of processing how we live, how we choose to live, because we may not have agency over the deaths of our loved ones, but we do have a certain amount of time here, don't we? And I've always wanted to live it fully and deeply and committedly in the best way I can. And it's something I work very strongly on with clients, is how do you want to curate your life now?
Yeah.
In light of what you've learned, what you know, this new understanding of mortality and life and death, how do we live now?
Mm.
And that feels a very important part of the processing. And we never stop. There isn't an end to it. It's not a year that we grieve our loved ones, or 2 or 3. It's a lifetime, but that's not depressing. It's interesting, hopefully, as we can gather more strength and a bigger, better, deeper foundation around our grief.
Yeah. I think it also stems from the definition of grief. Like people have a certain idea what grief means. And once they've experienced the pain of grief, the first question is, will this ever stop? And I often use David Kessler's word. He says, there will come a point when you grieve with more love than pain. And I think that's a beautiful way to describe it. Grieving per se doesn't equal pain. That's a part of it. And so you just said before about wanting to make the best out of your life. And I heard you say that before. And yet our clients, or some of them, at some point when they come to us, or I have some, and probably you too, there are those who count the days until they're going to be with their loved ones. And they can't see any joy in making the most out of their life because their soulmate has gone. What would you say to them?
I just stay alongside them. I think in those days, sometimes weeks, months, years of really feeling that profound loss, it's very hard to see any light on the horizon, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And I think all we can do is keep helping them to process it on different levels. And even if they're repeating the same thing week after week, month after month, and it's not shifting, I trust that it will start to shift at some point, and I'm happy to be there alongside until it does.
Yeah.
Well, not until it does, and beyond. But I think it's looking at what's happening for them in their days and weeks, and how can we maybe look at it differently.
Yeah.
So sometimes they'll come with a very set view of something that's happened, and it might be feeling very negative to them. But there's normally a different way of looking at it. And so I try and help them to look at different angles and different perspectives. And I try introducing them to different reading, to different ways forward, in the hope that at some point something will resonate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I haven't yet had anybody who hasn't sort of shifted in some way at some stage in that process.
Mm.
It's trusting the process. We hear those words a lot, don't we? But it is what you have to do.
Yeah. And I think when we're in it, it's different than when we're with it. Yeah. For us, and I think that's important from what you've shared in terms of your experience in that little room where Harry was, and that it was distressing for you. And I also shared, at the beginning of my grief journey, there were times when I was hating myself in a way that, and I've written it in the first book, that's why I know it. I said to my husband at the time, you have the chance to leave at any moment. I'm stuck with myself. I was so angry at times with the way I felt, with the way it was. I was, and my mother died from suicide following depression. So I was tired of living, but not suicidal per se. And I had the joy of my younger daughter, but all in all, this is a really intense time. We're not sugarcoating it all. We're just having this perspective of time.
Yeah.
And I think that's the benefit of the effectiveness that we can have with people. We're just a little ahead, and we're showing them at times, okay, this is something that can come, may come, and to turn, as you say, perspectives around to also, the word of acceptance as well, or what people say to each other. You just have to move on, or you have to go out to draw this apart a little bit and to create more hopeful outlook in life.
Absolutely. I'm really happy, same for you too, that I did actually write all this down and produce a book about it, because some friends of mine have come forward to me and said, I really had no idea what you were going through at the time, because in the memoir part of the book, I really spell out how bad it was at the time. And I think it's important, because people might see us standing today and think, well, they couldn't possibly have been through what we've been through, And of course it's different, but it was so traumatic. And for me, I think I didn't shift massively for about 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly wasn't a year. And I found the second year possibly slightly harder, because people were getting on with their lives and the reality was really sinking in, and time is such a weird construct, isn't it? And it's so hard when you feel that gap widening from when you last saw your child. It's so unnatural, isn't it, that we would not see a child for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's suddenly nearly 2 and then nearly 3. And that gap widening is terrifying. And that's where continuing bonds needs to come back in, and sowing these seeds of how do we keep these memories alive? How do we keep the connection? Because what we don't want is closure. What we do want is connection to them. It's the opposite, really. And so that's where staying the distance with somebody until we can help them find more connection.
Mm-hmm.
But those moments, how long the severe pain takes up all that space, so that connection isn't always possible at first, because the pain is too raw.
Yeah.
There's a sort of moment where you can start feeling that shift of, maybe just even if it was one day last month that somebody had peace of mind for a day or an hour or 2 hours at first,
Yeah.
And that timeline is different for everybody, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we're back in this field of early pain or raw or acute grief, where naturally there's a lot of resisting the loss, resisting the reality of the non-physicality, to slowly moving into acknowledging it. And I think these words, they sort of make a transition, not a flip switch that says, okay, now I've accepted it or I've acknowledged it. And it's moving, and acceptance comes in waves. Or acknowledging it comes in waves. It can and does coexist with anger and sadness and yearning. And it's not a final need stage. It is, and as you were saying before, acceptance with grief itself is such a beautiful thing, to then look at the different ways that grief can show up, and not just take one definition that people tell you or think it is.
I sometimes think it's like having a recipe, isn't it? We're adding to this recipe all the time with more ingredients, and as we can gradually sort of gather these ingredients that are going to make it more palatable and more full and full of flavor rather than pure pain, then that's a good thing. But that gathering is a lifetime of gathering. It really is, isn't it? Of adding into this recipe that can help us.
I also see a lot in the sense of befriending grief as this ongoing companion, not as a problem to eradicate. Of course, the pain is really hard, and that will soften with time. And it's this moving into, how do I live with this companion here that is going to walk next to me, and accepting that missing them and hurting for them is a part of my life now, in different ways at different stages.
Absolutely. Natalie, as we're talking, it's reminded me of, could I read a short poem?
Please do.
It's Sister Frances, who founded the children's hospice movement, put this in my book. She gave it to me for the book, and I interviewed her in the book too. And it's by an author, poet, and psychiatrist called Avril Stedderford, who worked at Sir Michael Sobell House, the adult hospice in Oxford in the UK. And it's about what we're talking about grief changing and softening and our relationship with it. And it's called The Heavy Stone. And she says, "My grief was a heavy stone, rough and sharp. Grasping to pick it up, my hands were cut. Afraid to let it go, I carried it. While I had my grief, you were not lost. The rain of my tears smoothed it. The wind of my rage weathered it, making it round and small. The cuts in my hands have healed. Now in my palm it rests, sometimes almost beautiful, sometimes almost you." It's such a beautiful poem, isn't it?
One of my metaphors is the grief crystal. And I have this here on my desk, and whenever I speak with clients, I say, well, this one doesn't shape in my hand because it just remains like that. But I say, well, this is what I've been given, and it doesn't sit neatly in my hand, and it's too big to be not noticed. But after a while, I get used to its sharp edges, and I find a way that it sort of sits not comfortable, but okay. And then after a while, I also get enough strength to carry it. And sometimes I can even lay my hand somewhere and it sits there, but it is supported. And yeah, so it's
a beautiful analogy. How amazing you had it there after that poem. You've just illustrated it totally.
I still wish I could go on walks with you and talk about that all the time, because it's beautiful to see the similarities we have on, not just on continuing bonds, but also how we carry our grief with us, as I heard you say, as I say to my clients as well. And yeah, to help those along the way. I always find it challenging to know that I cannot take away their pain. And then I'm reminded, and I can walk with them. I cannot take their grief crystal, their grief stone, but I can just walk with them.
Yeah. And we always remember the friends and family who really have walked with us, don't we?
So I have a question for you. If Harry could sit in with us today and listen to us speak, what do you imagine he would be most proud of or most surprised by in the way you now accompany others, or the way you carry your family, or your family carries him?
Oh, gosh, you got me. I think, well, the first thing that came to mind, and I like to use the first thing that comes, because I think that's the gut instinct and we should listen to our guts. And my first thing that came to mind with that question was laughter. She says with tears in her eyes, but they go hand in hand, as we know. And as a family, we have carried on laughing eventually. I mean, actually, even in the early days, I remember 6 weeks after he died being absolutely slayed by guilt because my second son, Cam, was being so funny in the school nativity play, age nearly 6, that 5. He had me in hysterics. And because I had cried so much for weeks on end, I laughed and laughed and laughed in the church where this nativity was being held for the primary school. Then I felt so guilty afterwards. But ultimately, I have learned that laughter is so healthy in our family, and we laugh so much. And we've carried that on. And the house is still visited by so many friends and family. The laughter continues, the games around the kitchen table where Harry sat so often, And so for me, that continuation of laughter is the thing that I'm most proud of, because it's hard won with grief.
Absolutely.
It really is hard won, but it's natural. And I celebrate it so much. I celebrate tears and I celebrate laughter hand in hand, because we need the tears to excavate our grief and get it out of our bodies and release our systems from this pain. And we need laughter in the same way to give us joy, to share laughter with other people is the greatest gift. So that's what I think he would be most proud of, because he had a very silly sense of humor. And he had, when he was really young, he had this flock of imaginary chickens that lived in a chair in our living room. And they were yellow and fluffy, and there were a lot of them. And if anyone sat on the chickens, and we never quite knew where they were going to be.
They were not always in the same chair.
No. And there'd be peals of laughter. You've sat on my chickens.
Oh.
He was very funny, and that's what helped him get through his numerous physical challenges. And we were so lucky to have his mind. He was bright and loved life. He was a cup half full person. And that's what I'm so grateful that, I think we've carried that on. That's his legacy in our family, is laughter.
Yeah. And I can definitely say that when I look at your Instagram, I can see pictures of him and of you. And there is this this smile in both of your faces that is very alike. So, yeah. And for those interested, obviously, as always, we'll have all those links also in the show notes.
Thank you.
There's areas we haven't spoken about, and maybe I can convince you to have another conversation another time. But for today, I think this is a beautiful way. And, from what you were saying about joy, there's one sentence I say to most of my clients, which is, you are not healing to handle or to feel grief. You're absolutely knowing what that is. You're healing to be able to handle joy again.
Yes.
And
beautiful.
I think that is, with what you just shared about Harry and his spirit, definitely here with us today.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Natalie. What a beautiful conversation. I feel so lucky to have had it.
Me too. So thank you so much. And I'll hope to have another one with you.
I'd love to come back.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.